All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next in a series of Blue Waters webinars. I'm Maxim Belkin at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Today's webinar is titled Visit, Scalable HPC Visualization and Data Analysis, and it's a special webinar. This is, first of all, this is the third overall Blue Waters webinar. Second webinar on scientific visualization, and the first webinar with actually hands-on activity. Moreover, we have three presenters, all of which have double consonants in their last names, and this is the first webinar which is hosted by me. Without further ado, I will pass it on to the first presenter, Eric Brugger. Eric?
Hi, so I'm Eric Brugger from the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Welcome to the Scalable HPC Visualization Data Analysis webinar. I'll start off with a quick overview of the topics we'll be covering in our tutorial. We'll start off with an introduction to scientific visualization using Visit. There'll be two parts to that. I'll be doing the first part, so I'll give a little bit of an overview of Visit, the history, and talk about its architecture a little bit. And then I'll talk about visualization concepts. And that'll take roughly a half hour, and then I'll turn it over to Kevin Griffin. He's going to give a 1 hour hands-on live demo. The condensation of 3 of our tutorials that we give. And then the last half hour will be done by Cyrus Harrison, who will be going in depth visualizing the results of a blood flow simulation. So here we have a couple of, here we have our faces, so you can put faces to our names and voices. So Kevin Griffin on the left, Cyrus in the center, and then myself on the right. So here are some materials. I believe these are ones for also webinar announcements, links to material for doing if you'd like to follow along on the tutorials. So data files, preparation you need to do for the tutorial, and then additional information. So then, again, just to go over the outline. So I'll be giving an introduction to Visit, and then we'll talk about visualization techniques, and then Kevin will give a guided tour, followed by Cyrus.
So Eric,
and then just give a little bit of an acknowledgement. So the blood flow simulation data set, that was generated using the LightZ finite element solver, and the people on the last bullet, the 2 guys are responsible for running that simulation and making it available to us for our tutorial series. So give them thank you for that as well. With that, I will start with the project introduction. So Visit is an open source, turnkey end-user analysis and visualization tool for mesh-based data, and I'll talk about more what it means mesh-based data. It's an end-user tool. It's designed to scale from the desktop all the way up to your largest HPC clusters. The source code is released under a BSD-style license, so you're free to download it and build it on your own systems, as well as modify and enhance it. Over on the right-hand side, we have a picture of the Visit graphical user interface, along with an image from a simulation of a 27 billion element Raleigh-Taylor instability calculation. I'm going to be showing you that picture a lot, so I'll just give you a little bit.
All right. So, so the Raleigh-Taylor instability calculation, so that's a simulation of 2 fluids. So you have a heavy fluid on top of a lighter fluid, and then they're allowed to mix under the influence of gravity. So you get spikes of heavy fluid flowing into a low-density fluid, and then you have bubbles of low-density fluid rising up into the high-density fluid, and then you get the mixed patterns that you see there, and we refer to that as bubbles and spikes. So let's see. So Visit supports a wide range of use cases, 5 in particular. So the first is data exploration. So this is when you've run your simulation and you just want to get an idea of what the simulation contains. So we have tools for slicing and dicing the data. Once you've done that, you want to do some things more quantitatively. So you want to get actual numeric values out. So you might query individual values of data in your data set. You might do some type of queries, find out what the min and max of a field is. You might do queries over time where you look at some value and plot it as a function of time. Next use case is visual debugging. This is for simulation code developers. So this is the case where a simulation developer finds some anomaly in their simulation code and they'd like to understand what's going on to make that happen. So they might want to drill down to an individual cell in their simulation code and find out detailed information and relate that back to code in their simulation code. Comparative analysis, this is for the case where you've got multiple simulations and you'd like to compare two of them. You can also compare simulation data versus experimental data. And then lastly, there's presentation graphics. This is the case where this kind of happens at the end, so you want to share your results with colleagues, so maybe in a journal article. You'd like to produce some high-quality images or maybe generate videos for showing at a conference. Visit can help you with that as well. Here I'll just give you a brief overview of some of the different types of visualization techniques. This isn't meant to be exhaustive, just to be a sampling of some of the techniques. So streamlines and pathlines, those are for visualizing vector fields. And then we have tensors and vector and tensor glyphs. Those are for visualizing vector and tensor variables. And then we have our bread and butter technique. It's called pseudocolor rendering. So this is where you map scalar field values to color on surfaces. Volume rendering is the 3D equivalent of that. So in addition to just putting it on a surface, we incorporate the opacity, which allows you to see through 3D volumes to make areas that you're not interested transparent, so you can focus on the areas of interest, which are more opaque, and then you can still see it in the context. Molecular visualization and parallel coordinates, those are more specialized techniques. Obviously, molecular visualization is for doing ball and stick models of molecules, and then parallel coordinates are for understanding relationship between correlations between lots of different field values. So here we are back at our Raleigh-Taylor instability calculation. So visit runs in a distributed parallel memory setting on HPC clusters. So typically the user likes to think of their data as one large chunk. So the image on the left is the way that the user thinks about it. But when the simulation code runs, it actually, we're running it in parallel at least, it breaks it up into lots of smaller chunks. In this particular case, it's broken it up into a little over 3,000 pieces. And each one of those pieces is run on a separate core of your HPC cluster. And every cycle, they exchange information along the boundaries between those little pieces. And then also just to mention real quick, so the bread and butter parallelization right now is distributed memory using MPI. We're also working on enhancing that so that we can support threading. So on a single node, use multiple threads, as well as many-core architectures, which would be for architectures like the Intel Knights Landing, as well as GPUs. So now I'll give a little bit of a history of Visit. So the project was started in 2000 at the Lawrence Livermore Lab to handle visualizing and analyzing data from a set of new simulation codes that were being developed to be parallel. And then in about 2006, the DOE Office of Science had started up some institutes for visualization, and Visit was a part of that. So a lot of research and development from SIDAC program were put into Visit. So there was VASIT, which ran from 2006 to 2011, and then there was a follow-on institute as well, SDAV, and that was another 5-year program, and more additional research and development went in, and that's just wrapping up right now, and the expectation is that there'll be a follow-on, and then Visit will be part of that as well. So now Visit is supported by multiple organizations, so several national laboratories contribute to Visit, as well as several universities that are listed there. And then there's also one commercial organization called Intelligent Light that also provides modifications to code, as well as consulting and education and things of that nature. Over 75 years of effort were put in, person years were put into the Visit source code. It's over 1.5 million lines of code, so a lot of resources have been put into it. Just a little bit more. So Visit focuses on making an end-user tool. So we have regular releases. We shoot for about 6 per year. We don't always make that, but that's the idea. We have binaries available for all major platforms, so we support Windows, Mac OS X, and several flavors of Linux as far as binary releases. And we also have a build Visit script, which allows you to build Visit as well as all of its third-party libraries that it depends on, and you can use that to build Visit to run on your HPC cluster. We also have user support and training. We have a wiki. We have email lists for people to ask questions. We have tutorials like the one you're getting right now, and then documentation. So one of the strengths of Visit is its flexible data model. I'm not going to talk to the words on the left, but I'm going to show you the pictures that talk about the pictures on the right. So if you start at the cube-shaped object on the lower left, that's a uniform mesh. So all the cells are the same size and they're aligned with the grid axes. And then if we go clockwise upward, we have a curvilinear mesh. So this is basically you've taken a structured mesh and you've deformed it. And in this case, it's a 2D simulation. So you can think of it as a surface. And then we'll move to the unstructured case. So that's in the lower right-hand corner, that globe-shaped object. That's actually made of 4 different types of shape types. So there's hexahedron, which are 6-sided, and then there's also tetrahedron, pyramids, and wedges. Most of the elements that you're seeing, you're just seeing the outside, so you can't actually see some of those more complicated, those other shape types, but they happen to be along the axes that the globe is being rotated about. And then up in the upper right-hand corner, we have an example of an AMR mesh, which stands for Adaptive Mesh Refinement, and I'll talk about that later on as well. But the idea is that you've got meshes that are overlapping each other at various levels of resolution. So the next big thing is, we've got this powerful visualization tool. Okay, I want to be able to visualize my data. So Visit supports about over 110 file formats. A lot of those file formats are associated with specific simulation codes. So simulation codes have their, kind of their own file format, and people have written over the years many different types of readers specific to simulation codes. We also have a number of more general purpose file formats that we support. So an example of that would be the plain text database. This is real simple data, comma separated value files. This is a way to describe point data and get that into Visit. You can also describe simple structured grids as well. We also have this Visit writer utility. This is C source code, and you can just include that into the source code of your simulation code and then make calls to it. And this allows you to write data that Visit can read without introducing any third-party library dependencies or having to deal with complicated build system. You just add that to your code and make calls to it, and it's very generic code, so it should run on all platforms. And then we have a number of general purpose library file formats that we support, like VTK, Silo, and XDMF. We also have a pretty extensive manual that describes how to get data into Visit using the Silo library in particular. And it also has information as far as writing new custom readers. So that if you had a simulation code and you wanted to write a custom reader for that, how you would want to do that as well. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the architecture of Visit. So it's a parallelized client-server architecture. So the client runs on typically on your local desktop, and there's a viewer component. So that's what does the actual rendering. So that window you see on the left-hand side, that's the viewer window. And then also there's also other additional processes that run. There's a Visit GUI, which is a graphical user interface, which gives you all the the windows and controls to control it graphically. We have a command line interface, which is Python, so you can script it. And then we also have a Java programming interface. So all those different clients can be active at the same time, and you can have the graphical user interface up and also running the Python scripting at the same time and do a lot of powerful things. And then, so once you've got your client running, it connects to a parallel server on your HPC resource. I'll talk about the parallel case. You can also run a serial version if you'd like. If you have a small data set, there's nothing that says you have to run it in parallel. The parallel version basically is scalable from the entire pipeline, so it reads data from a parallel file system in parallel. It does all of its data processing in parallel. If you're going to generate some type of an image, it'll do the rendering in parallel, and then there's a composite in phase to bring it into a single image, and then ship that across the network to your client. And here I'll just, just show a little bit more graphically how that scalable rendering works. So if we look at the center, you can kind of see we've broken the problem up into 4 pieces, and each one of those pieces will be operated on independently. And then if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, those are the 4 images that are generated by each of the 4 processors. And then those are composited based on the depth information to give you the final image that's displayed on the right-hand side. And this is the case for surface-based data. We also have a scalable volume rendering technique as well. And furthermore, you can combine surface data with volume data. Visit also provides a platform for generating custom workflows. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can add additional file format readers to Visit. So, Visit has a C++ plugin architecture. We have plugins for 3 types of things: database readers, plots, and operators. Plots are rendering techniques, and operators are ways to manipulate your data. We also have interfaces for creating custom GUI. So if Visit's GUI is designed to be general purpose, but if you want to tailor it to some specific application, you can generate custom GUIs as well. We have Python interfaces. Python is a very powerful scripting language. You can use that again in conjunction with the graphical user interface, but you can also use it for batch processing. So you could set up some kind of a script, and then you could have it go off and do a bunch of processing in the background in your batch system. And then, when it's done, you just get notified and look at the results, so you don't have to sit there in front of it. We also have the ability to do data analysis using Python expressions and queries. So this is actually giving access to the raw arrays that Visit uses for doing processing, and you can do that in parallel to generate custom processing. And then we have some in situ coupling. This is a way to embed Visit directly into your simulation code. So basically, this allows you to transfer your data in memory to Visit and then use the same compute resources that you're using for your simulation code to do the processing. And if you're generating, again, images and stuff, it can do all the rendering and compositing and then ship the results to your client running on your desktop. So you can do all of that while your simulation is running. Visit's been used to deploy a lot of research. As I mentioned earlier, it was part of the Office of Science VASIT Institute as well as the SDAV Institute, and during that time, a lot of research was put into Visit. Current research efforts are lightweight in situ processing. What I described to you just a moment ago on the previous slide, that in situ technique is what I would call heavyweight. So it actually uses a fair amount of resources from your compute resource. What we're working on is a lightweight in terms of processing and memory to use in the future. Also working on node level parallelism again, as I mentioned earlier, to take advantage of threading, Knight's Landing, and GPUs. And then we're always working on new distributed memory parallel algorithms. So just to, again, to summarize, Visit has a lot of different types of visualization techniques for pretty much running the gamut of different types of visualization capabilities that you'd want. So data exploration, confirming that your results are correct, and then communicating those results to other people. It has features for different kinds of users, so visualization experts, so there are people generating very sophisticated visualizations and analyses, code developers, these are developers of simulation codes, as well as people who use simulation codes. And you know, it's being actively developed and has a vibrant developer community. So that wraps up the overview of Visit. Now I'll talk about mesh-based simulations. So I'll start off talking about the pseudocolor rendering. So this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of the bread and butter technique. So you map scalar values to color. And on the left-hand side, we have an example that, you know, probably everybody has seen in elementary or grade school. We've got a map of India in this case, and then we've colored it by the elevation above sea level. So things that are at low levels are colored green, and then the highest mountains were, for example, Mount Everest. That's in the Himalayas, and that's at a very high altitude, so that's in orange. So again, a very basic thing that everybody should be familiar with. And then on the right-hand side, we just have another example of that. Volume rendering, that's the 3D equivalent to pseudocolor. So in this case, we cast rays through the data set, through the 3D volumes, and based on the scalar at each of the points that we sample as we're going through that volume, we assign an opacity and a color, and that allows you to kind of get rid of the areas of interest that you're not interested in, focus on the areas that you are interested in while still giving you some amount of the context, the 3D context. Isosurfacing or contouring, that's a technique for generating either a line or a surface of a constant field value, so this applies to scalars. So the line of the surface is that constant field value. On one side of the line or surface are field values greater than that, and on the other side are field values that are less than that. And then again, on the left, we have an example, a 2D example that I'm sure most people are familiar with. If you've ever done hiking, you get your map, and it shows you these contour lines, which indicate how high the elevation you are. And if you see a lot of tightly packed lines, you know that you have a steep hill to go up or down. And then we have on the right-hand side a 3D analog to that from I think that's from a supernova collapse. So next I'll talk about particle advection. This forms the foundation for a lot of our vector field visualization techniques. The idea is that you put a particle, a weightless, massless particle into your vector field. So if you look at the vector field on the right-hand side of the image, there's that red dot, so that's my starting point. And then I'm going to move that a small amount based on the vector field. And then I'm just going to take and repeat that process over and over again. And as time passes, that particle will trace out a path, which will give you an idea of the vector field. And typically you seed things with lots of different particles. And I'll just give you an example of that. So here you can see how that particle moves. And that traces out a streamline, essentially. And there are two different types of streamlines. There are streamlines and pathlines. So streamlines assume a constant vector field. So usually that's at a particular state in time. You just use that one vector field over and over again to advect that particle. Pathlines are a little bit more complicated. The assumption there is that the vector field changes over time. So you start off with your point, you move it a little bit based on the existing vector field, and then it moves it to a new location, and then you bring in the new vector field and then move it from there using that new vector field. In terms of computation, they're the same, but the I/O requirements are drastically increased for doing the pathlines, because now you have to read in all your velocity information to do those, trace those paths. So here I'll talk a little bit about meshes again. So basically there's two concepts with meshes. You have a set of coordinates. These are points in space, and there are different terminologies used in different fields. So nodes, points, vertices, these are all equivalent names for the same thing. And then those points are grouped, are used to form little regions of space, and those are called zones, cells, elements, depending on the field you're in. And then we have, again, some of those examples there. And in Visit, we use the term zone and node. So throughout the user interface, you'll see zone and node used, as well as in the Python scripting interface. So we have our meshes, and then we have fields defined on those meshes. And I'm going to talk about linear fields. So basically, there's two types of fields. There's also higher order elements, and we have limited support for that. But I'm just going to focus on linear elements for this. So we have nodal quantities. So you have field values assigned to the nodes of the mesh. So if you look at the picture on the lower left-hand side, those blue dots, you have your field values associated with those nodes. And then if you wanted to find the field value inside of a cell, you would do linear interpolation. In this case, since they're quadrilaterals, you would use a bilinear interpolation. For zonal variables, those are associated with zones, and those are assumed to be piecewise constant across that zone. So that'll be the next image as you move to your right. And then we have, so that's the case for scalar variables. We also have support for multi-valued variables, so vectors, tensors, and then I have some example images of that on the lower right. So a vector field as well as a tensor field. And then moving to more complicated things, we also support the concept of multi-material cells. So this is the idea where you're within your cell, you've actually got multiple materials, and those materials occupy specific regions of that cell. So on the right-hand side, we have an example of a two-material problem within a uniform mesh. So the colored region is one material, and then the white region is another. And those values within those cells are the volume fraction for the colored material. So that's a value between 0 and 1, 1 representing completely filled with that material, 0 representing that there's none of that material present. And then we have different techniques to figure out approximately where that interface is located, since those volume fractions are not enough information to actually completely determine where that interface is. We have different techniques. Some are volume preserving, and some give more smoother interfaces. And then you can see here we have one interface that's generated from that using one of our algorithms. Species is another type of way to have sub-zone quantities. It's a little different than a material. Materials were assumed to occupy a portion of those cells. Species are assumed to be more uniform, so a good example of that is air. So you might have a cell filled with air, and the air is comprised of lots of different gases, like, say, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, et cetera. And there isn't a portion of the cell that's just oxygen or just nitrogen. It's assumed to be uniformly mixed. We also support domain decomposed meshes. This is how we deal with parallelism. So typically when we run in parallel, we'll just use the decomposition that's used by the simulation code that allows us to work very quickly read in the data, and we don't have to do a lot of additional processing to repartition it. And then here we have some examples. Obviously, the picture on the right is our favorite Rayleigh-Taylor instability calculation, and we can also support, like on the left-hand side, that's a decomposed unstructured grid. And then lastly, we have adaptive mesh refinement grids. So these are a series of grids which are overlaid one on top of the other. So we have a coarse grid at the basis, and then we have finer and finer grids that overlay those. Basically, when you have some more interesting physics going on, they refine that section of the mesh to capture that more interesting physics. So if you look in the center, we've got a patch 0 mesh, and then we've got a overlaid portion of that. We've got a patch level 1 mesh, and then we've got a level 2 mesh, actually 2 patches of that. The reason for the patches is, so again, for parallelism. So usually a CPU will process a single patch. And then again, there's on the right-hand side, there's a more pictorial representation of that, so you can kind of see the relation between the different resolutions. So at this point, we're going to start to transition to the guided tour of visit. So as I mentioned earlier, Kevin's going to give you a condensation of multiple introductory scripts of tutorials. Why don't you take it away?
Yes, I will. So thank you, Eric. Good morning. I'm Kevin Griffin. And then before I get started into the hands-on tour visit, there should have been a link in the webinar announcement for where you could click on to install Visit and set your Visit installation up. It has a link to executables where you can download it. Then it gives you different steps on how to ensure that your release is functioning correctly. So I'm assuming that everyone's been to that link and has Visit set up and going. And I want to show you another link, visitusers.org, where you can actually get the source code. So here's where you can download the source code and actually compile it on your particular platform. So we're not going to go over that today. That's kind of more on the outside of the scope of this hands-on tutorial, but I just want to make you aware of that link. So without further ado, let's get into the hands-on tour visit. So once you download and install Visit, depending on what platform you're on, I'm on a Mac. If you saved it to your desktop, you can double-click the icon on your desktop. Or for me, I saved it into my applications folder. And once you click on it, Visit will start up. And once it's up, Eric kind of touched on a couple of features of Visit. On the left, you have the graphical user interface, and this allows you to open databases up and interact with and set up with different plots and operators. To your right, you have your viewer. Your viewer displays a lot of your data sets and a lot of the different analysis that you're working on. So the first thing you want to do once you have Visit up and running is open a file. So just go under sources, there's this open icon, and it will bring up a file chooser that will allow you to navigate to your data set and open up your file. So for me, my data set's under downloads. And this is the data for the webinar. And you click on the particular file that you want to select on. And so as you can see, this is a .silo file. Now Visit has the smarts to guess what type of database reader you need to open that file up. But on rare occasions, excuse me, on rare occasions, if you need to select a certain database, this drop-down has a list of all the different data readers that Visit has installed, and you can select a particular data reader that you need also. And while we're on this window, Eric also talked about client-server mode. A lot of times you're going to just run Visit locally, but if you want to connect to a remote engine, here's where you will select that engine to run on, and you will select the remote server that it's running on, and then it should bring up a dialog. Data file. So select your data file. Again, Visit will choose the appropriate reader to open it up, and then you will be prompted to either run in serial or parallel. For this hands-on, we're going to run serial. And then it opens your file. As you see that nothing shows up in the viewer, and this is by design. You know, Visit doesn't know what you want to do with the data yet. You might want to look at a subset of the data, so it doesn't want to visualize it and waste that time for you to just go back and then have to do some changes. So once you open up your data reader, the next thing you want to do is open up a particular plot. So in this instance, we're going to do a pseudocolor plot of pressure. And then you can see the icon turns green. This gives you a chance to do any modifications you want to the pseudocolor plot attributes. If you want to do nodal centering or you want to change the color table, this gives you an opportunity to make those changes. Once you're satisfied with the different options that you have, you can go ahead and draw your pseudocolor plot, and now you have your visualization of your data. So once you have your plot up, if you want to look at the mesh that's supporting your plot, you can also add the mesh to the visualization. Again, Visit doesn't do anything initially. You have to explicitly tell it to show the mesh. And from here, you can hide and show the mesh if you want. Just hide show. Once you have the mesh selected, you can hide it, or you can also show it again. And again, you can also modify the plot attributes, color table. If we want to use a different color table, we can select a different color table, hit apply, and now you see you have a new color table that's in effect. So every plot comes with different attributes that you can modify, and usually on the particular plot, you just expand it and double click, and you can bring up that plot's attributes. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, and then if you have things that you want to delete, just select on it, click delete, and then it's gone. After you have your plot, there's also different things that you want to do with your plot. In this instance, we're going to apply an operator, a slice operator to it. So under operators, there's different types of operators that you can apply to your visualization. For this one, we're going to apply a slice operator. And again, the viewer goes blank. This gives you a chance to go into the slice operator attributes and select how you want to do different slicing for your particular visualization. For this instance, we're just going to keep the default and then click draw. And now we have a 2D slice of our 3D data set. And for Visit, there are, once you're happy with your visualization and you've applied different operators and you have it looking the way that you want it to look, there are 6 different navigation modes that Visit has. The first one is just allows you to pan, zoom, and translate your visualization in the viewer window. Your zoom toolbar button allows you to select over your image and zoom in and out on it. And you can always get back to the original view orientation if you click on this icon, the reset view icon, and that'll take you back to the original orientation of your visualization. You can also do zone picks. Zone picks allows you to get a lot more information from your visualization. You can click on particular zones and you can get information about that zone, like incident nodes, the values of different scalars that are attached to that particular zone. And you can switch different variables, and there's a lot of attributes that you can change there. So we're just going to clear the pick and dismiss it. The other mode is node pick, and this again is similar to zone pick. It allows you to click on your visualization and get more information about a particular node. So we're going to clear the pick and dismiss this window. And then you also have spreadsheet pick mode, where it puts a lot of the information into this window that's formatted like a spreadsheet and gives you more details of individual nodes and at different time steps. You also have a line out mode. If you select that, this allows you to look at different values as a function of distance. So if you make a line out in your visualization, you will get a nice plot of your different values. In this case, this is pressure over distance. And you can see the different pressure values over the distance of your visualization. And for all the windows, once you have extra windows pop up, the toolbar icon, the fourth one from the left, will dismiss that window. And there are also other plots, subset plots and different plots like that that you can add to it. And we'll cover some of those plots a little later. Once you have your image and you've added your operators and done your analysis, you can export these windows also and save them. So under File, before you, so say if you click on Save Window, it'll take your defaults and it'll save them to whatever the defaults are. If you wanted to change those defaults, first you have to modify them under Set Save Windows options. Here, you can specify the file name that you want. By default, the file name is going to be visit, and by default, it's going to output the image to your current directory. So you can deselect that, and you can choose where you want to save that image, and you can also change and choose what type of file name that you want. You can also change the file type that you want to use. And then once you're happy with these, and when I go over presentation graphics and presentation techniques, I'll talk more about the different options here. But once you have the options to your liking, just click Apply, Dismiss. And now once you do a save window, it will, at the bottom of the GUI, you can see where it saved it at, and it will save it to the custom settings that you've put into the set save window options. You can also, and that saves the image. If you want to save the underlying data, you will go to, you will actually save the database. And under File, there's an option for Export Database. And this allows you to save the underlying data that you use to render this image and do the analysis on. And I will go into this too in another session. But this gives you, it shows you the different options and the different formats that you can export your database to. All right, so we're going to go on a little bit of subsetting. So I'm going to delete this. So once you have your visualization in your viewer window, if you want to open up another data set, you can delete all of your work out by selecting it and clicking delete. And that will get rid of, that will clear your viewer out. And so we're going to open up a data set with multiple domains, and so I can show you how subsetting works in Visit. So again, you click Open to bring up the file chooser, and then you navigate to where the data set is. In this case, Visit kind of remembered where I was at, and so I don't need to navigate to it. I clicked on this multi-UCD3D.silo file, and again, Visit will choose the correct data reader that I need. So once I have it up, I'm going to create a subset plot. And so to add a plot, you go under Add, go to Subset, and then we're going to look at the different domains for this data set. And so now you can see we have a 3D data set. Eric showed a picture of this in his presentation. This is a data set with multiple domains. And a lot of times what you want to do is look at different domains within your data set. And so to do this, they have this kind of Venn diagram that you can select on. And this brings up a dialog window that allows you to select and deselect certain domains within your data set. And so if we click on domains, you can see all the domains listed here. And we can choose to show or not show certain ones. And now that I chose just 3 domains, you can see that it provides a subset visualization of my data set. You can also select different materials. And so if we If we select all the domains back again and select on materials, so if you have different materials in your data set, you can also choose to show and hide those also. If we choose to hide materials 1 and 2, you see that we're left with just material 3. And so that concludes kind of the basic tour of visit. So now I'm going to go into how to do data analysis once you have your data sets and you have your images in your viewer. And so I'm going to delete these plots and start over fresh. And so the first thing we're going to look at are queries. And so first we're going to open up our data file. Again, click open and choose, this time we're going to choose example.silo. So once we have our file in, we're just going to do a pseudocolor applied of pressure. Again, the line turns green. That lets you know that visit's ready to draw it. This gives you an opportunity to, again, go into the attributes, make any modifications you need, or add different operators. We're not going to add any right now. We're just going to click draw, and now we have our image again in the viewer. And so under controls, there's an option called query. And this allows you to query different values for the image that you have in the viewer. So some of the things that you might want to do, well, first of all, this list, once the display is on all, they have a list of all the built-in queries for visit. And you can kind of filter out this list if you just want to do queries that are mesh related. If you click mesh related, it'll show you all the queries that allows you to query different aspects of the mesh. One of the popular queries is the number of nodes that you have. And so if we just have original data selected and select number of nodes, this will tell us the number of nodes that we have in our data set. And again, nodes and points are kind of an overloaded term in visit. And then if you want the number of zones or the number of cells, you can click that and do a query. It'll tell you the number of zones that are in your data set. And so one of the sometimes confusing things about this number of nodes and number of zones query, if we back out of here and go to our operator and do a 2D slice of our data set, and then we go back to our query and then we do a num nodes query, and we'll see that we still have the same number of nodes. And this seems kind of odd, but if you notice that there's two radial buttons, one original data and one actual data. And so if we click actual data and do our query, now we get the number of nodes that we expect. And so once you apply different operators or do different things to your data, make sure you select the actual data. That'll give you the right values that you're looking for. And there are also, we go to variable related. Within this query interface, there are a lot of interesting queries that you can do. If you want to get the minimum value, the minimum pressure value of your data set, you can query it, and it'll give you the minimum value and give you the coordinates of the node with that value. So there's a lot of good queries that you can do in here. Let me do. All right, and we're going to do, the next one we're going to do is a pick-related query. But before that, so before I showed you can do a pick from the viewer if you click on one of your navigation buttons, but you can also do it within the query interface. But before I do that, I'm going to turn off this slice operator so that we can have a 3D view of our data set. The line out that we've done in the viewer was only applicable to a 2D version of our image. But if we want to do a line out in a 3D view of our data set, we'll have to do it through the query interface. But for this one, we're gonna do a pick, and then we'll do a 3D line out. So under query, just like we did for number of nodes and number of zones, just select pick, and I'm going to clear out these results down here. And then the pick will give you all these different options to the right. And so you can choose the different, if you want to do a different variable, you can choose it under variables. We're going to use the default. The default variable is what variable that we had for our pseudocolor plot, which is pressure. And then you have these options to pick using coordinate to determine zone, or pick using coordinate to determine node, or you can use domain and element IDs. And we're just going to keep the default. And for the default, whatever node that you want to get information about, you will put that information into your coordinate. And then once you do a query, it'll bring up the pick window like before, and once we did it from the viewer, and you'll get your information, but it'll also display some information in your query results too. So there's basically two ways you can do a pick. You can do it either through the viewer by selecting either zone or node pick, or you can do it through the query window and select the pick query. All right, so let's dismiss that. All right. So you can also, so the queries that I just showed were just queries for a single time step. You can also do queries over time also, but this requires you to have a data set with multiple time steps. So we're going to open up a data set with multiple time steps. So we're going to delete our plot, again select it and click delete, and now we're going to open up a data set with multiple time steps. And wave.visit has multiple time steps in it. And so if we just add a pseudocolor plot by going through add and going to pseudocolor, and we will select pressure. And now we have, and I'm going to recenter the view. And the neat thing, if you go into GUI, you can click the play button and it'll actually go through all the different time steps and animate them for you. And then so you can see the various time steps of your data set. And you can also single step through the different time steps too. But once you have a data set with multiple time steps, and if we go under controls, query, now if we want to do, let's do a variable sum. And now if we select the query and we see the due time query, since we have a data set with multiple time steps, we can actually do that query over time. And it usually gives you options, the start and time step, the ending time step, and the stride. We're going to keep the defaults, but you can change those to the middle time step and change your stride also. And once you do a query, you'll get a 2D plot, and it'll show you the values of pressure over time. And I'll dismiss this. And if you want to dismiss your window again, go to the fourth icon from the left, and you can dismiss your window. And then, all right. And the same with pick also. You can do pick. We're going to do a pick over time, so you can do different queries over time. And so let's do a pick over time. what's interesting about doing a pick over time is that you can actually select multiple variables. So right now we have a default variable. And so let's put in U also. And we're going to keep the same defaults as before, but this time we're going to select do time query. And now you can see that we have extra options, create single y-axis plot and reserve pick coordinates. So we're going to keep the defaults for now and do our query. And actually, let me do a different, so that what it'll tell me is that variable has a different centering. I'm going to get one with the same centering as pressure and then do it. And you can actually change, so now we have a plot of pressure. We can change the variable to U and then click draw. Actually, that's the wrong one. And now, so now we have a pseudocolor plot of U, and hopefully the centerings match up so I can do this query over time for a pick. No, it still doesn't like that either.
So Kevin, the issue is the pick using the coordinate to determine zone or node. That's the issue.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. And so for this one, we have two variables, but we have them both plotted on the same, in the same window on the same plot, on the same axis. When you have more than one variable, you actually have the option to do multiple y-axis plots. So we're going to dismiss this and do the same query again, create multiple y-axis plots. And now we see that we have our two variables, the values plotted on two separate axes. And so for the, and actually let me bring this back up. So in the controls query, you can also in the controls query over time options, you can also select the units for your x-axis. By default, it's cycle. If you want to view time on your x-axis, you can select that, or time step. That's where you can kind of change that default. So now we're going to get into expressions. So expressions in Visit allows you, so for queries, queries give you a single value over the entire database. Expressions allows you to, and actually I said that wrong. So query gives you, a single value. Expressions allows you to create values over the entire database. And to get to expressions, going to controls, expressions, and here's where you can create expressions and add custom values for each node in your data set. And so let's open up. So we're going to close out wave.visit. And we're going to open up noise2d.silo. So go to open, click on noise2d. And we're going to create a pseudocolor plot. And so for the first expression, we're going to create just a simple algebraic expression. And so if you click on new, this allows you to name your expression. And we're just going to name it radial 2. So right now we have plotted our radial scalar value, and it ranges from 0 to 28.28. And so we're going to create an expression where we multiply this value by 2. And so we're going to call it radial 2. And it's going to be a scalar value. So under types, you can select different types: vector, tensor, arrays, or scalar. So this is going to be a scalar mesh value. And then we're going to do a simple expression radial times 2. And then we're going to click apply. And then we have this check show variable in the plot menus. And then if we come back to our GUI, and we'll see that we have our new expression here, radial 2. And if we select it, you'll see that in the viewer, it updated. The image still looks the same, but our range goes from 0 to 56.57. So that was someone. You can also write expressions that access different coordinates and things of your mesh. So if we go back to expressions, under controls, expression, we can also create an expression that accesses the different coordinates of our mesh. And so if we click new again to create our new expression, and we'll call this one chords. And since we're going to access the coordinates, it's no longer a scalar, it's a vector, so we need to change our type to a vector mesh variable. If we put our cursor in the definition pane and go to insert function, and we have different categories. Now we want to access values on the mesh, so we go to the mesh, and then we'll get one of visit's built-in functions, chord. And then once we have that function, we'll put the name of our mesh in there, which is mesh. And then we'll click apply. And now if we go back to our variables, and so this is going to give us our vector. So now we're going to add on there. Now we want to, after we hit apply, we want to get the X value. And now that, so we're going to get the X value from our coordinates. Our coordinates is a vector. We want to access the X and Y value. Again, this is going to be a scalar value. And then our X is going to be the previous expression that we created, which is chords. And since it's a vector and it's 0 based, chord sub 0 is going to get us our X value. We're going to hit apply. We hit new. We can get the Y value. Again, it's going to be a scalar mesh value. And since this is a vector again, our Y value is going to be chords 1. And now we can calculate our distance. And so we create a new expression again, name it distance. And again, this is going to be a scalar mesh value too. And now we're going to use the value of the expressions that we created, the X and Y. And if we go to insert function, under math, you see the square root function. And we're going to do the square root of X times X plus Y times Y. And if we hit apply, now we have our distance expression created. Now, if we go back to our plot, let's delete this out. Now we're going to add a pseudocolor plot of Shepherd Global. And now we're going to apply an isovolume operator and use the distance expression that we just created. So if we go under operators, we go down to selection and select isovolume. And again, now we have a chance to change some of the values. And instead of the default, we're going to select the distance expression that we created. And we're going to do a lower bound of 5 and an upper bound of 7. And then click apply, dismiss it. And now when we click draw, we should have our image based on the expression. So this is a way of sub-selecting and applying operators based on expressions that you created. And so this is kind of giving an example of, and this is a generic example, but this is giving an example of, you know, some of the analysis that you would want to do. And of course, it would be more meaningful with more meaningful values, but this is an example of that. All right. And now I'm going to move on. So this kind of gives you a feel and a little flavor for visits, query, and expression interface. Because we're running a little low on time, I'm going to actually give a presentation. So I'm going to give a little tour of Visit's Python scripting interface. Before Cyrus gets into his. Cyrus is going to use a little Python scripting, so I'm going to show you a little bit of the Python scripting, and I'm going to clear this out. And so I'm going to actually shut everything down because there's two ways you can do Python. You can do it from the command line, or you can do it while the GUI is up also. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to launch the CLI from the command line. And so wherever your visit installation is located, for mine, I have one located on my desktop. So you just type in a path to your All right, so first I'm going to go to where I have my script set up. And so for Macs, this is how you get to the visit that you have installed. For Windows, it's a little different, and for Linux, it's the same concept, but just different path that you have to type. So once you have the path to your visit, there's two versions you can do for the CLI. You can do a no-win version if you want to run batch scripts. For me, I'm actually have the window up because the script I'm getting ready to run actually shows images and does a pseudocolor plot. So visit -CLI is what brings up the command line interface, -S. After that, you put in the script name that you want to run. For me, I have a script called pseudocolor.py, and so that's the name you give it. And then you hit return, and now the CLI starts up. It'll prompt you serial parallel, and now you see the pseudocolor plot that it brought up. And let me make this a little smaller. And so once you have the CLI up, you can do different things in there. You can run Python commands. If you run a dir command, this will give you the different functions that you can use within Visit to script the different analysis that you want to do. And if you see a particular function and you don't know how it's used, you type in help, that window there, and the function name, and it'll give you information on what that function does. And towards the bottom, it'll show you an example of how to use it within your Python script. And so if I want to delete this window, so I'll look for, okay, we see so delete all plots. If I don't know how to use that, I'll type help, delete all plots. And it'll give me a description of what it does. And then at the bottom, it'll show me how to use it. And so if I do a delete all plots, and then it deletes the plot out of my viewer window. And then you can, from here, you can also interact with the viewer that you have up. You can add different plots, and you can do everything that you did in the GUI from the CLI. So if I want to add a Pseudocolor plot back up, I give it a variable. I believe there's a variable. And just like in the GUI, it doesn't do anything initially, so you'll have to tell it to draw plots. And then it'll draw a Pseudocolor plot. There's different attributes that you can change on the command line. Everything you can do in the GUI, you can do from the CLI also. And so that's a way to do it from the terminal. I'm going to actually show you how to also do it while the GUI is up too. So you can run the CLI from the command line, and you can run it while the GUI is up. So when you have the GUI up, under controls, there's this menu item called Launch CLI. If you click on it, it will start the CLI up. And let me make this so you can see it. And so if we open up a database, again, we're going to open, and I'm going to navigate to this data file. And now we can interact with the Python interface and the user interface at the same time. So we can do an add plot. Let me just see what variables they have. Radio. And you'll see in the GUI that it brings it up and shows you that you have a Pseudocolor plot and it's green, let you know that it's ready to draw. And so now you can click draw from the GUI, or you can say draw plots from the command line. And then you get the plot that's drawn. So there's two ways. You can do it just strictly from the command line, or you can do it while the user interface is up too. And so you can send commands through the CLI, or you can also do commands from the GUI too. And for the last 10 minutes, I'm gonna go over presentation graphics. So let me get out of here. All right, so this last hands-on is going to go over how do you prepare your visualizations for maybe publications or just to look better for a presentation. So the first thing I'm going to do again is open up my data file. And we're going to create a pseudocolor plot. Everyone should know how to do this by now. And now that we have a pseudocolor plot up, some of the things we might want to do is get rid of the legend, some of the user information, and some of the database information. So the first thing you go to kind of modify things like this is under Controls, Annotation. From here, it gives you a lot of different options where you can change the viewer and change how the graphics look. So the first thing we're going to do is go to Colors, and we're going to do a gradient background. And if we hit Apply, you can see that we have this. Let me slide this over. We have a gradient background now. We're going to set the foreground color to white. And let's do let's do an image background. So we're going to do an image background. If you go down, you'll see background image. This gives you lets you bring up a file chooser to where you want to get your image at. And we're going to do it. We're going to do a star filled image. And so what we're going to do is kind of, assuming that we're going to give a presentation on global warming, we're going to kind of set this image up to kind of make it look nice and ready for presentation. So we have a star background. We have the picture of the Earth there. And now we want to take off some of these axes, and we want to get rid of the bounding box. And now you can see now this is starting to look a lot better and start to look more ready for presentations, right? And we're going to go to the now, and if we rotate it, we'll see that the star background just stay there. We actually want the star background to kind of move with the image. So we can make the background an image sphere, and we can increase our repetitions in X and Y. And once we click Apply, and now we can see that our image rotates with our visualization also. And then you can add, Visit also has different objects that you can add to your visualization. So we want to add a time slider. We'll keep the default name. And if you look in the lower left, you can see there's a time slider there. And you can change the start color. We'll change ours to blue. We'll increase the height a little bit. And you can put text into your image too. So by default, it's in the center. We can change it to global warming. And once you click Apply, if we want to get it above our image, this combo box here allows us to position this text wherever we want it. And click Apply. You can use this text positioning widget, or you can actually put the coordinates in manually too, and it'll move your text around. And so we have our animation slider. If you want to check that see your animation slider work, if you go back to the GUI and hit the play button, you can see that it's stepping through the different time steps, and the time slider is moving too. And this, if you want to make a movie or anything like that, this will be a good feature to have. in 5 minutes. So once you have everything set up like you want, you can either create a movie or you can save this image too, like I showed before. So under File, we can go to Set Save Options, and this allows us to change some of the different aspects of how we're going to save this image. We can change the different file name. The family checkbox, that allows you to save multiple images that don't get overwritten. It'll actually look in your directory where you're saving the images at, and if there's a file with the name collision, it'll append a number, and it increments it by 1. So if you have 2 images saved, 1 and 2, it'll actually save your next image as global warming 3. And before I showed this before, you can choose the directory that you want to save it to, and then you can change the formats here. Depending on the different file format, there's different options that will get enabled or disabled based on the different file format options that you're selecting. For the aspect ratio, so screen ratio, this is going to be based on the image of the screen. The only thing with this is that if you wanted it to get a real high resolution image, you're going to have to select the no constraints, and then you can select it how big or small that you want it. A lot of times what a lot of folks do is that they'll do no constraint and they'll have a very high resolution, and then once they put it in the presentation graphics, they actually kind of trim it down so they can get this anti-aliasing effect. So if you want that effect, select no constraint, and then you can select whatever resolution you want. Screen ratio is going to be based on the limitations of the screen that you're working on. And then you can do, if you have multiple windows up, you can do multi-window save. By default, Visit will tile the windows, or you can select this multi-window save and specify how you want the multiple windows to get saved. Once you're happy with all the different options, you can click Save, and Visit will save the window for you. So with that, that concludes kind of this hands-on tour of Visit. What Cyrus is going to do is he's really going to kind of bring a lot of this stuff home with a real targeted type of tutorial on this aneurysm blood flow tutorial that he's doing. But it's going to bring a lot of these concepts home and package it kind of in the one idea. But this was to kind of show you some of the more popular features of Visit and give you a feel to what Visit can and cannot do. So Cyrus, it's all yours.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone. I'll be up here in just a second. So thanks, I guess, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. So as Kevin said, he gave you a basic tour of the GUI using some of our toy data, some of our example data that we use for testing. And the very last part, what we're going to do is kind of tie this together in a more narrative approach. So let me get up and running here. Get the screen. Okay, so this, as well as a lot of the other materials that you've seen as on our visitusers.org page. So the thing that we're going to be following along here, if you'd like to, is this blood flow aneurysm tutorial. And this is very prescriptive, excuse me. So it has, it has all the nitty-gritty of all the stuff I'm going to type. So if I miss something, you can always come back to this and look at it. So this data that we have here is courtesy of some folks from the Swiss Supercomputing Center. It was run a few years ago with a solver called the Life5 finite element solver, and it's for simulating a aneurysm in an artery. So it's a small simulation. We'll see it, but it's maybe some people think this is a little bit of a morbid thing, but this is actually a very important medical exploration that you can do with CFD. And it gives you a little bit more of a concrete idea of how to ask and answer questions of a real data set. That's why we like to do this type of sort of narrative hands-on. So for this, I'm going to be doing two different parts, the initial data set exploration, and we're going to get into visualizing the velocity vector field. The data set here is available through this tutorial data sets. The link is the one called aneurysm tutorial data. So you can grab that if you'd like to. And let's get started. All right. So I already have visit up here. And first thing I'm going to do is open the data set. So you'll have to navigate to where you have it on your machine. But in my machine, I have a folder for this tutorial where I unzipped everything. And I'm going to be clicking on aneurysm.visit. So what this is a file that groups, there's several hundred time steps of this aneurysm data set. This is a file that groups those. So I'm going to click open and then click OK. And the first thing we're going to look at is the mesh topology. So whenever you're doing a simulation, you have to mesh it up some way. So the mesh represents, how you're discretizing space and time, as we've seen. In this case, I'm going to add a pseudocolor plot, I'm going to add a mesh plot of mesh. That's what it's called. And I'm going to click draw, and this will show you our computational domain. So Kevin went through this a little bit before. There's a bunch of different options for all the different plots. In this case, I'm going to play with a couple options of the mesh plot just to give us a better idea of what our data looks like. So first thing I'm going to do, I expanded the arrow and I clicked on the options for the mesh plot. The first thing I'm going to do is click this show internal zones option and click apply. Now when I do that, you see this kind of dense mesh here that comes out. What that's doing is before we were only looking at the outside of the data, and now we're looking at all the computational elements of the data. So you can see that there's a lot of them. By many standards, this is still a very small mesh, but we can ask and answer questions about this. So if we would like to know how big our mesh is, we can do that using the query interface. So I'm going to do that now. So I took off show internal zones. I'm going to click on controls query. And then from here, I get the query window, which Kevin showed you earlier. And we're going to look at the number of nodes and the number of zones. So in this case, I do a query, and I find out we have 130,000 zones. Now, if you're looking at the wiki page, there's some questions, kind of like some questions that you can quiz questions. So normally when we do this in a live audience, it's a little bit more fluid, but in this case, you're going to hear me ask the questions and answer them myself. So please don't think I'm a crazy person, but this is, I think, the best way to do it in this context. And feel free to ask other questions on Slack if you'd like to. But in this case, one of the questions we ask is, well, okay, what is this mesh constructed of? And if you look at it, you can see on the exterior surface, we see all these triangles. That's a hint. It's not a surface mesh, it's a volumetric mesh. So it's actually composed of tetrahedra. And if we look here, if we do number of zones, so we did that before, that tells us we have 130,000 tetrahedra. And if we do number of nodes, we know we have substantially less. So, 25,000. So you can tell that these zones and nodes are sharing lots of vertices, as you would expect. Now, in this particular simulation, the mesh is actually fixed over time. It doesn't change as the problem moves. The values on the mesh change. So the CFD solver changes the values, and basically the solver is not moving the mesh, so it's not Lagrangian. It's more of an Eulerian type of frame. So the mesh itself may be a little bit boring, but it's important for context. This data set also includes two different scalar values actually, it's one scalar value and one vector field that we'll look at. So let's start by looking at the vector field for pressure. So to do that, I'm going to add a pseudocolor plot of pressure. And I'm going to click Draw. So there's some example options you can set here to make it look a little bit better. If I look at the pseudocolor plot, I can change the color table to spectral. I think it also suggests you invert it. It's a little more intuitive to me, but that's fine. Now, what we're drawing here is the pressure, and we're only really seeing this on the exterior surface of our computational domain here. But if you notice, there's 200 time steps, so I'm going to move it. The frame rate won't keep up necessarily that well on the broadcast, so I'm just going to move it to a couple discrete times. But if you move it, you'll notice that this pressure is changing over time. So that's what's changing as the simulation evolves. And when I think about a heartbeat, and when most people think about a heartbeat, the question I like to ask is sort of what's the canonical signal you think about, or what's the thing that comes to mind? And that's, or when you think about a heart simulation, it's the heartbeat. So I messed up and gave you the answer before the question. I apologize. So we should be able to, if we're simulating, we're not simulating a whole heart here. This is just an aneurysm, a small aneurysm in an artery, but it's got to be driven by something. So it should be driven by something like a realistic heartbeat. And that signal should be something that we could pull out of our data. So to do that, we can use a query over time. And we can query the pressure and see if we can have find the heartbeat signal from our pressure. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go under Controls Query Over Time options. Kevin showed this to you very, very briefly, but there's different, basically you can set your x-axis a different way whenever you're thinking about things over time. And what we care about here is the actual time. So the simulation provides time in seconds, and we want our x-axis on our output to be time. So I'm going to set that via the Query Over Time options. And then we're going to go back to the query, Controls Query, and pull up that window. And I'm going to do a max query. I'm going to do a max query over time. Kevin showed this a few times. So under the query window, I select max. Original data is fine. We click Do Time Query, and then I click the button. Now, visit's going to go off. There's 200 different time steps to this. So right now, it's frantically reading all those time steps on my laptop and doing a query to get the pressure. So here we are. So we got our line out here, and this line shows us the maximum pressure of the entire simulation that we have, and you can clearly see that there's a heartbeat signal here. So we're here to have about two beats. If you're so inclined, you could figure out the frequency of those and figure out if that makes sense. But this is just an example of how we can use this aggregation mechanism, which is Visit's query mechanism, in order to extract a signal out of our data and get some intuition from that. So the other thing that we have here is we have velocity. Delete this thing. So the velocity is a vector valued field that encodes how things are moving in the simulation. And Visit also automatically exposes that to us as a scalar. So if I go to Add Pseudocolor Velocity Magnitude, Visit figures out that there's a vector value, and it creates this expression automatically for you that allows you to look at the scalar field. So if I click on this, you see the picture. Now this is probably a little bit boring. Even if I move the time steps, it looks a little bit boring. The reason why is good. So we want this is the wall of our artery. We don't want velocity coming out of the wall of our artery. So, but if we zoom in here on the inlet, you can see that things are moving. Things are changing, shifting. So what we'd like to do is get a better idea of what's going on with the velocity values inside. So to do that, we're going to use some operators. So Kevin showed you a isosurface and isovolume very quickly, but I'm going to describe those again here. So if we care where things are moving very quickly inside of this, there's different ways to do that. So if we pull out an isosurface or a contour, we can say, please show me the surfaces where the value of this magnitude of velocity is high, and that's where things are very fast. So we can do that by adding an operator, an isosurface operator. So if I click on Operators, Under slicing, there's isosurface. And I'm going to delete this mesh plot for now. We don't really need it right now. And I'm going to double click on the isosurface operator attributes. And there's a couple values I know to be values that I'd like to look at. So 10, 15, and 20. I'm going to set those, click apply, and then we're going to draw. And now we're just going to see the values of high velocity as they progress through time. So again, I'm going to hit to a couple time steps here. And you can see, okay, the structure is obviously changing out of time. The other thing you'll notice is that we've kind of lost the context here a little bit. We know that the artery is there somewhere, but we're just seeing different parts of it. So it would be nice if we put up a plot that could still give us an idea where the whole mesh is, even though we're subsetting things out. So let's do that very quickly. So to do this, I'm going to add a subset plot, which is a lot like a mesh plot. It just doesn't draw lines. It fills things in. And under the subset plot options, I'm going to do something unique here that you haven't seen. So in Visit, by default, if you add operators to your plots, they're applied to all of them. But you can turn that off. Why would I want to do that? Well, if I keep this mesh plot on, and it's doing the isosurface, we're not going to see the original data set. What we'd like to do is only isosurface so we can get the subset and then still have the mesh there for broader context. So I'm going to uncheck Apply Operators to All Plots, which is down here under the plot list. And I'm going to remove the isosurface operator from this subset plot I'm creating. If I draw this now, you'll see, okay, there's my subset plot. But I can't see into it anymore. So what I'm going to do is change this subset plot, and I'm going to change the color to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. And then I'm going to make it transparent by sliding this opacity bar all the way down to 25. Okay, there we are. So now we have a picture where we can see the context of our mesh, and we can see where the high values of velocity are. And if I go to just a couple different time steps here, you can see this is evolving. I could play this. I don't think the frame rate will keep up across the link on the webinar, but if I can play this, things are definitely evolving. And if you stared at this, you'd say, well, I can see what's happening. Obviously, things go faster when the pressure peaks. Remember, we saw how that heartbeat is driving it. So when the pressure peaks, that's when things start to go faster, and then they stagnate. So that flow characteristics are there. Okay, so we're looking at isosurfaces now, but we can also look at subvolumes. So if I scroll in here, I'm going to keep it here for a second, you can see we kind of have these nested surfaces of high velocity. So another way to look at this is to say, well, I'd like to get subvolumes between, say, 10 and 20, which is my high region, instead of just particular surfaces. So we can do that with the isovolume operator. So I'm going to add another plot that does that, and we'll compare the two. So if I go to Add Pseudocolor, again, we're going to be looking at our velocity magnitude. This time I'm going to add an operator which is under Selection called isovolume. And I'm going to click on this, and instead of saying I want 10, 15, and 20, discrete surfaces, I want everything between 10 and 20 for this isovolume. Now if I draw this, you can see that I actually have, Visit has actually gone through and extracted the surface. So let me just show you the difference between the two here. So we can, I can do, basically you can hide and show particular plots, and right now I have it set up so we can just toggle between the two. So that is the isosurface version, and this is the isovolume version. So isovolume is useful if you want to just pull out different volumes, and you can integrate them and things like that. So if you want to know the total amount of mass that's at high velocity at a particular time, then that gives you a way of doing it. You can cut it out with an isovolume, and then you can do an aggregation query like what we saw with a variable sum or a maximum or something like that. So we've been using scalar field techniques in order to look at this, and to finish up, we're going to switch to look at the vector field itself directly. So this is the second part of the aneurysm blood flow tutorial called vector field visualization. For this, I'm going to get rid of our pseudocolor plots, but I'm going to keep this mesh plot that gives us the context. So, you know, vector fields are complicated beasts, so there's a lot of different ways to think about them. The simplest way to think about them is with a vector plot. So what a vector plot does is it draws little arrows for every one of your vectors or a subset of your vectors in your data set. So it gives you an idea of the instantaneous, basically the instantaneous direction and magnitude of your flow field. So I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to add a vector plot, and the variable that we care about here is velocity. And I'm going to set a bunch of options to make it look better. So open this guy up. The first thing to note is that so drawing vector plots is kind of expensive because it creates a whole bunch of geometry for each one of your fields. So it makes these little nice looking arrows. So by default, Visit tries to be very conservative and say, hey, you only want to draw a couple of them. I need to override that and say, well, I know better. I would like to draw every fifth one. So I'm going to draw every fifth one by under vector amount. I'm going to choose stride and do every fifth one. And under the data tab here, I'm going to change the color table to something slightly better. So I use red, yellow, blue. There's a bunch of different ones there. And under glyphs, I'm going to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to type these in. Again, they're on the wiki page, so I'm going to type them in, but maybe you'll be able to follow. If not, please consult the wiki page or go back and look at it later. So I'm going to scale them by 0.5, and these are just sort of magic numbers that I know from having played with this data set. We're going to draw the arrows of the vectors as cylinders, and we're going to do high quality. So let's just do those things. So I hit apply. So those are all my options to set up my vector plot, and now I can click draw, and I'll see my vector plot. So again, this gives me an instantaneous view of the velocity vector field at each time step. So if I drag this guy, the time slider here, you see that the problem is very different. You know, this is not a steady state problem. The vector field changes dramatically over time as the CFD solver grows, and that's what we expect too, right? Because we expect the heartbeat to be driving it, so we expect it to be a dynamic problem. And if I animate this, you can get an idea. Again, the frame rate might not come through that well, but you could get an idea of what's happening as the time's going on. You can make a movie of this. That's good, I think. So that's one way to look at things, but it's actually these little hedgehog, or these little arrows, I guess I would call them. It's a lot of visual information that you have a hard time digesting. So you have all of the vectors everywhere, and you're kind of trying to look at them once. It's maybe better to do things with a little bit more smarts. So one of the ways to do that is with a streamline plot. So Eric talked about this in his intro when he was covering a lot of the different concepts that we use in scientific visualization. You know, Streamlines is one of those, and that's common to all the tools. What we do with Streamlines is we select a couple places where we'd like to drop some particles. And we drop those particles, and we'd like to use our vector field to move those particles along our problem. You can think of it as putting ink into a vector field and how it would advect to infinity as a streamline. And if it was static, and if it was dynamic, a pathline will actually take into consideration the differences in the vector fields over time. So what we're going to do is very quickly do a streamline plot, and we're going to do a pathline, change that into a pathline plot as well. I'm going to skip one step here. The step I'm going to skip from the document is the step where we use visit in order to try to figure out where to seed the streamlines. So that example, we do a cutting plane, and we say, okay, where's the maximum of the inlet? And I'm going to skip that now and just pretend like I know where the seeds, where I'd like to put those seeds. So to do a streamline plot, you're actually going to do a pseudocolor plot, but it uses a special operator. So I go to Add, Pseudocolor Operators, Integral Curve. So interval curve is the name of the infrastructure that we use to do streamlines and pathlines. So I'm going to do an integral curve of velocity. It automatically adds that operator there for me. I'm going to change a bunch of things about this operator. So setting the seeds, there's a bunch of different options for those. In this case, we're going to be seeding around a circle. So I'm going to cover those. Type these in. Okay, so the magic place that I know to put this is at 3.45, 3, and 5.5. And there's also an orientation that we need. Again, consult the wiki page if you'd like to have these exact values. I'm going to change the radius to be basically the size of the inlet, and I'm going to sample along a boundary here, and I'm going to have 12 points. Okay, I know that's a lot, but the gory details are there for you in the wiki page. I'm going to make things, I'm going to turn off a bunch of warnings. Now, these warnings are good if you're doing analysis, but for this particular use case, we don't want them popping up and bugging us. So I have my Streamline set up, and I can actually change how they look as well. Under the Pseudocolor plot, I can turn them to tubes and make them a little bit bigger. And put heads and tails. So just do these real quick. I apologize. I know this is quick. All right. Okay. So here's my streamlines and you can see where they're seeded here. So these are my seed points here on this inlet, and they're pretty fat here for this picture. You can adjust them to make them look better. And again, this set of streamlines, basically I have 12 points here, and this is the path that those 12 points would take if there was a static vector field at this time. And this changes pretty dramatically throughout the whole time, basically throughout the, because the vector field is very different as we saw. So the streamlines at any particular time are quite different than they would be from another. So again, if we'd like to know, the intuitive thing to think about is, okay, well, if we were swimming along in this artery, where would we go throughout the time of the simulation? And that's what Pathlines gives us. So luckily, it's pretty easy to enable Pathlines. So under the integral curve options here, there's under Appearance, there's an option for Streamlines versus Pathlines. So we click Pathlines, and there's one other thing we have to do. So in doing Pathlines, we have to have some way of interpolating between these different mesh values. So if your mesh changes every time, that's a much more complicated operation, but we know our mesh is static, so we can enable this faster path. Mesh is static over time. I'm going to enable that. Click Apply, and now Visit's going to frantically calculate, it's basically reading all 200 time steps now and advecting those 12 particles across those. And then, so we're done here. So this is the path that a input particle would take if it were seated here at this time. So again, this tutorial, and that's the basics of the tutorial that I want to cover for the hands-on. This tutorial gives you a little bit better idea, and it's a little bit more prescriptive if you want to look at it after the fact of how you can think about your data set and ask and answer some more realistic questions than some of our dummy data sets. So I'm not going to try to cover any more now. We just got a few minutes. The only thing I would like to say is that, well, thank you, first of all. All of this tutorial content is available, on our wiki. And let me just put this slide up. So, yeah, and we appreciate the opportunity. If you have any questions, there's lots of different ways to get in touch with us. Make sure if you try to Google Visit LLNL instead of just Visit, because you'll get Visit Hawaii or whatever else, right? You'll have a hard time finding us if you just type Visit into Google. This contains our email addresses, and all the information is also on the Blue Water seminar page. You should be able to get to all that. And we thank you for joining us today, and thank you for letting us walk you through some of this stuff. And we'd be happy to answer questions. I'll hang around on Slack a little bit later, or you can send us emails. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn it back over.
Please join me in thanking Kevin, Eric, and Cyrus for a very informative webinar. So I'll just remind all the participants that you will receive an email as soon as the recording is available and we post it on YouTube. The next webinar will be next Wednesday, March 22nd, by Nate Kramer-Herman, and it is titled Makeflow and WorkQ. The next visualization webinar will be on April 5th by Vetri Bird, and it is titled Introduction to Scientific Visualization Using ParaView. Also, after this webinar, you will receive a short survey, and we would like to get your feedback so that we can improve our webinars further. And you can also provide feedback, actually anything that you would like to say. All right, thank you all very much. Thanks once again, Eric, Kevin, and Cyrus. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.